So more personal attacks on the campaign trail today, and parties holding out their differences over childcare, climate change and cell phone costs. But really underlying everything we're hearing now in the campaign is about trying to frame the ballot question around which leader do you really trust. Let's bring in three candidates now to discuss the latest developments. Adam Van Koeverden, the Liberal candidate for re-election in the Ontario riding of Milton. Michael Chong is the Conservative candidate for re-election in the Ontario riding of Wellington-Halton Hills. And Leah Gazan is the NDP candidate for re-election in the riding of Winnipeg Centre. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Mr. Van Koeverden, Justin Trudeau's now using Stephen Harper's name more and more in the final days of the campaign and warning Canadians that Aaron O'Toole's government would be Stephen Harper's government. Why is he doing that?
Well, I can't speak for Justin Trudeau, but I can say that the more that I look at the Aaron O'Toole 2021 platform, the more I see the same old conservative stuff from, a lack of ambition on fighting climate change, the same old tax credits that have never done anything to support lower income Canadians and help people fighting to be part of the middle class. I see a diminished, if anything, impact of their platform to address important issues like housing and poverty. I see no real commitment to walk the path of truth and reconciliation, and I see, unfortunately, for communities like mine, a heightened commitment to supporting the gun lobby. And this is just not things that Canadians support. It's not something that I'm hearing at the doors that Canadians support. So I suppose it's just more of the same from the Conservatives.
Mr. Chong, Aaron O'Toole's urging Canadians to punish Justin Trudeau by kicking him out of office for calling the election during the pandemic, saying he can't be trusted. But what about connecting him to Stephen Harper's policies? A lot of Conservatives like the Stephen Harper policies on climate, and Mr. O'Toole would keep the same targets. He would make direct payments to families on childcare, as was the case under the Harper government. So why isn't the analogy fair?
Well, quite simply because we've done the heavy lifting within our party to change our position on climate change. We spent a lot of time consulting across the country and came forward with a robust plan to reduce emissions. It partly builds on the current government's plans, but it takes a different approach in other areas. And the plan's been vetted by experts and praised as a good, coherent plan to take us toward 2030. On childcare, we believe that our plan is a much better plan because, quite simply, for this reason, it will immediately provide relief for low to middle income families across the nation without that takes into account the different kinds of families out there, that takes into account that Canadian families live in urban and rural areas, that not everybody works 9 to 5, that people work shift work, and that people have different daycare needs. Look, the current government has promised childcare, a national childcare system, since 1993. They've trotted out in 6 or 7 of the last number of elections, and they each and every time fail to deliver. Canadians are not going to believe them this time.
Leah Gazan, Justin Trudeau again appealed today to progressive voters to abandon the NDP, saying Liberals are the only ones who can stop a return, as he put it, to the Harper era under the Conservatives. So the Democrats have seen this movie before. So how do you stop it from happening again?
Oh, and you're absolutely right. I've seen this movie for over 150 years of Conservative and Liberal governments, both governments who have never, ever met a climate target. We have the worst emissions, GHG reduction effort in all G7 countries right now. And in fact, the Liberal government during the pandemic gave, in fact, $120 million in wage subsidies to Imperial Oil and paid out $324 million in dividends to their wealthy shareholders. This government is not serious about climate change. The Liberals came out after almost 30 years saying they're pushing forward a national child care strategy. They decided to call an election instead, and we've seen the rights of children, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, being violated by a failure of consecutive Conservative and Liberal governments to provide proper telecom services to people.
But what's the singular message to progressives to say, look, you don't need to cross the street to Liberals here? What's the message you have for them?
Well, we know that the Liberals particularly have a history of campaigning on the left and governing on the right. One only has to look at all the corporate bailouts that happened during the pandemic, not to people, but to corporations, to know that we have a pattern of behavior in this country.
All right, Mr. Van Koeverden, the Liberal campaign of late, and this appeal to progressive voters, again, to abandon the NDP, to block Erin O'Toole from winning, that's being described by opponents as an act of desperation. How do you respond to that?
Well, when you don't have to look to Liberals to see people, lauding the Liberal platform on the environment and climate change. And I will acknowledge that my friend from Wellington Halton Hills has been a strong voice for the environment and climate change from within the Conservative caucus. But I would argue that he hasn't really made too much of an impact, because Andrew Weaver, for example, and many other experts across the country consistently give the Conservative platform on the environment and climate change failing grades, whereas ours has received praise from former Green leaders, from former NDP leaders. Our plan to address the environment and climate change is real, it's achievable, it's ambitious, and it's ratified by experts. So you don't have to rely on Liberals to tell us, to tell Canadians that our platform is the best. You can look at experts in the housing industry. You can look at experts in the environment and climate change, and economists as well.
Right.
We're not alone in saying that we have the best path forward, and we have the best plan for Canada's future.
Mr. O'Toole, I want to ask a little bit about healthcare here. Erin O'Toole sent a letter to the Quebec Premier telling him he will negotiate compensation for Quebec for cancelling, daycare, the Liberal daycare plan. 8 provinces have signed on to the plan. And I guess a lot of people are wondering today, why aren't Conservatives promising to compensate the other 7 provinces for cancelling the Trudeau childcare plan? Is that something that should be talked about?
Well, first off, we've said we'll honour all the existing agreements that have been struck between the Government of Canada and the provinces.
For 1 year, for the first year.
Yeah, those agreements are in place, and we'll honour those agreements as they have been struck by the current government. But we think that a better approach is to provide direct assistance immediately to low to middle income families across the country. Look, since 1993, we have had 9 general elections. And in the last 9 general elections, the Liberals have trotted out this promise of a national childcare program in 6 of the last 9 general elections, and they have failed to deliver since 1993. It's been almost 30 years. And Canadians are not going to fall for it a 7th or 6th or 7th time. It's simply not going to happen. So that's why we think our plan, which will deliver immediate relief, is a much better plan. And I might add, where's the pharmacare promise? It's not even in their platform. They promised in 2015 and again in 2019 to roll out a national pharmacare program. They've abandoned that promise.
All right,
so their childcare promise is simply not believable.
Okay, Leah Gazan, let me drill down on the trust issue here and weave in this part of the conversation. The polls show the Conservatives and Liberals at this point fighting it out for government. And I guess, which one of those 2 parties would you be prepared to support? Would the NDP be prepared to support in a minority parliament? So that talks about the issue of trust. And one of these 2, according to the polls, parties is likely to form government. I know New Democrats maybe don't want to hear that, but that's what the polls suggest. And a lot of people want to know who you're going to support if it's a minority parliament.
Well, look, I'm running to form government. Certainly, we know the Orange Wave, for example, during Jack Layton's time that, things can change on a dime. We've certainly seen that during this election. New Democrats have worked hard in the last parliament, working with all parties across the way, fighting for Canadians. That will not shift. That will not change, no matter who forms government. As of now, we are running to form government, and we will let Canadians decide who they want to be the next government on September 20th.
But couldn't the NDP benefit, some would say, to have voters know what the bottom line is for the party now if you have a minority parliament? What are the programs you would demand and hold to? Is national childcare, stiffer climate targets, pharmacare? Could putting those bottom lines out there now actually result in higher support for the NDP?
No, look, we had put, even in the last parliament before this unnecessary election was called, certainly universal pharmacare. Both Conservatives and Liberals voted it down. We proposed a wealth tax. Conservatives and Liberals shot it down. We fought to get the CERB payments higher. we were successful. You know, we fought for paid sick leave. Now the Liberals are talking about it in the platform. We're fighting to form government, and whatever happens, we will continue to fight for people in Canada.
All right, I need very, very quick answers here from you, and it's on this final issue of vaccinations have been polarizing in this campaign. The Prime Minister, Liberal leader, responded to a protester at an event last night, verbally went after an anti-vaxxer, saying, isn't there a hospital you should be going to bother right now, because the attacks were on the Liberal leader's spouse. Mr. Van Koeverden, what do you think of his reaction?
Well, I think we're all kind of frustrated with the degree of vitriol that's come from a lot of these protests, and I think members from every party can acknowledge that things like throwing rocks and protesting in front of a hospital are absolutely atrocious, and they shouldn't be happening in Canada. Very, very briefly, I'd just like to address the fact that childcare in a national program is not just a promise, it's also a reality in 6 provinces in Ontario, as pharmacare is in PEI. So we are making
Mr.
progress.
Chong, what do you think of the Prime Minister's reaction, first of all, and his suggestion that the protester go protest in front of a hospital?
Well, frankly, it's understandable. I condemn, the violence we've seen, the inappropriate behavior we've seen, not just directed toward the Prime Minister, but directed toward healthcare workers and our public healthcare system. It's simply unacceptable. And, in a free and democratic society, we solve our differences through free speech and debate, not through the threat of violence or through the throwing of projectiles or through misogynistic behavior like we've seen recently.
Leah Gazan, let me give the last word to you and what you thought of Justin Trudeau's reaction to that protester.
Well, I think there's absolutely no place for violence. Healthcare workers have not just put themselves, but also their families on the line. We need to hold up healthcare workers right now who continue to fight on the front lines of the pandemic. And, we can make decisions at the ballot box. There's no place for violence in this country.
Okay. Thank you all for your time tonight. Appreciate it. Good luck to all of you. And
thank you so much.
Get a chance to talk again. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Peter.
Take care.
To see you, Leah and Michael.
Nice to see you all. Bye-bye.